33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to continue our review of the House of Commons virtual hybrid proceedings provisions pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. We also today welcome new members to PROC. So we're just going to take care of we're going to give them a warm welcome, but we're going to just take care of a little bit of business first, and I'll pass it over to the clerk.
Hello, members of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions for first vice chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais proposer Monsieur John Nater comme vice-président.
Thank you. I propose Mr. John Nater.
Told that Mr. Nader be elected first vice chair. Are there any further motions? Seeing none, it's been moved by Monsieur Berthold that Mr. Nader be elected first vice chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion?
Wow, that's a warm reception.
Agreed. I declare the motion carried and Mr. Nader duly elected first vice chair of the committee. Congratulations.
That's good?
Yeah.
Perfect. So welcome to new members, and Mr. Nader, we're looking forward to working closely together. And it's a really good day to be here because we have an exciting first panel, which consists of current members of Parliament representing all four parties. The second panel looks at the use of hybrid proceedings in other jurisdictions with speakers of two provincial legislative assemblies and a representative of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. I would like to let the committee know that our virtual witnesses have all successfully undergone the pre-meeting connectivity and audio tests. So for our first panel, I would like to welcome Carol Hughes, MP Algoma Manitoulin, Kapuskasing, Yvonne Jones, MP Labrador, Tom Kimmich, MP Calgary-Shepherd, Andréane Larouche, MP Shefford, and Jean Yip, who is joining us virtually, MP Scarborough Agincourt. Before we start, a reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. MP Hughes, welcome to PROC, and please take the floor for up to 3 minutes.
Bonjour, ça me fait plaisir d'être parmi.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me to be with you here today. I'd like to recognize that we are on unceded Algonquin territory, Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. They occupied this territory for millennia. First of all, I would like to say that I know that the discussion is on if we should continue having virtual sessions or not, if it should continue to be accessible for parliamentarians and participants. Well, participants, we've been doing this for a long time, so I think that we see that it's been working to a certain extent. Of course, as at the House, we've had problems, even in the committee, but I know that technicians work diligently to try to improve connectivity. This is mostly the responsibility of the government as well in order to ensure that connectivity throughout the country is in a state where everyone is able to participate equally and fairly to parliamentary sessions or others. I'd like to begin by saying that as a parliamentarian myself, even before being VP, I had situations where I would have liked to participate at the House of Commons as a parliamentarian, but it was not possible because the technology did not exist for me at the time. I had many surgeries on my foot and my ankle, and I know that I still need further surgery. So it's very difficult in my situation sometimes to travel by plane or even to drive. It depends what foot is being operated on. And so I don't think that I should be punished because I want to take care of my health.
So again, there has been instances where I have seen parliamentarians have illnesses and find themselves coming here to Parliament earlier than anticipated. As a matter of fact, just yesterday I overheard an MP saying, I'm just starting a cold, and here we are 30 seconds already? Oh my gosh. So I just want to add, whether it's a death of a loved one, injury, illness, whether it's flights, which we've all been experiencing that if you're flying, has been very problematic, and that's beyond our control. We should still be able to participate no matter what. I went to Mongolia a few years back, and they were further ahead than we were with voting. And so I think that, we need to look at where we are now in today's day and age and continue to do that. Obviously, there should be some opportunities or some guidelines that either the Whip's office and the committees themselves in Parliament have to look at as to what would be acceptable. And I would say that I would not expect to be able to just virtually participate without the approval of the Whip's office. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
And when we look at the distances between some communities, it is difficult for them to be able to be here on time at times.
Thank you, Madame Hughes. We will now move on to Ms. Jones. Welcome to committee. Up to 3 minutes is yours.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, committee members. Thank you for making the time to hear presentations from MPs this morning. So first of all, there's a little handout that you're going to get. So there's 4 key points that I want to raise as part of my contribution this morning. First of all, I think the hybrid parliament has been a success. It came together rather quickly in a very difficult time. And like most talent changes that you make, there's some growing pains in it. And I think, while we went through some of those growing pains, I'm sure there's other ways that we can improve up on the system as well. But what I want to make sure is not lost on people is that there has been a shift in this country since 2020. And in ridings like mine, it is really being felt in my capacity to do my job. So let me just walk you through it. First of all, you have a map which shows the entirety of my riding. Small population of 30,000 people, a geographic area of 300,000 square kilometers. That is not small. If you were to take the island of Newfoundland, the province of Prince Edward Island, the province of Nova Scotia, the province of New Brunswick, it would all fit in my riding. It's an area served by 31 MPs. My area is served by 1 MP, which is me. Populations vary, of course, as you know. How do I get to my riding? And that's what I want to talk about as part of my presentation. You'll see how large it is. It borders on Quebec in 2 areas and way up north towards Nunavut. But how do you get there? So it's 4 distinct regions. 40% of my riding is isolated, fly-in, fly-out communities only. The rest of it I can access by road once I'm on the ground. And then road access from one community to the furthest away community I can drive to is over 1,200 kilometers. So it's not a short drive, just to give you an idea. When I leave here on a Friday, which I very rarely leave on a Friday because it's impossible for me to get to my riding before Saturday, and then I have to leave Sunday to come back. With the hybrid parliament was the first opportunities that I had that I could be there on a Friday, arrive through St. John's on Friday morning, get online, do my house duty, do my votes, whatever the case was, and then have the rest of the day in my riding. I was able to do that sometimes on Monday. Now with the flight schedule, we were having a 7-day week schedule of Air Canada. So I could go to Halifax, go into Goose Bay, go to St. John's overnight, next day go into Goose Bay, or go into Bon-Sablon on the Quebec side to go to this part of my riding here. And it's very complicated because it's very spread out and not connected. So then on the other days, I go to Western Labrador on this side of the Quebec border. So I overnight in Montreal. I take an early flight at 5:30 a.m. and I get there by mid-afternoon on Friday. So just to give you an example, because there is an argument that says you knew what you were signing on for. Well, when I signed on, there were 2 airlines, 7 days a week. Today, I have 1 down to 3 days a week, and a single airline going in to most communities, if either one at all sometimes.
Thank you,
So it's
Madam
made it very
Jones.
difficult. I have 4 very important points, and
We're
I'm
going to
happy
try to get those
discuss
out
them
in the
later
question.
if anyone
Perfect.
has questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Madame Jones. Mr. Kimmich, welcome back to committee. Up to 3 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So let me give a contrarian view on hybrid parliament. I don't think it's much of a secret that I'm opposed to continuing hybrid parliament in almost all of its formats. I think it works very well for committees to invite witnesses by teleconference, but it doesn't work very well to build in a camaraderie and high morale that each caucus requires. So my comments will be reserved really as the former elected National Caucus Chair of the Conservative Party, as a recognized party on Parliament Hill. I served that role from 2019 until 2021. So during the entire length of the pandemic, I believe we were the first caucus to meet online over Zoom that we had selected as the best method of meeting. We actually met first 3 meetings with no interpretation because the House of Commons wasn't able to provide it. I also say this as a father of 3 living kids. One of my daughters, my youngest daughter passed away, Lucy Rose, August 13, 2018. And I took time off in order to grieve, which was then turned into a private member's bill based on my experience that I had. I came back too early to Parliament, October 15th. I'll readily say that, and it was not good for my marriage at the time, having returned so quickly. But my team made it possible for me to participate by making sure that I was paired for very important votes in my riding. So those votes happened October 3rd. I still monitored my email, as you know, everybody who's grieving for a lost loved one will do this. You'd find things to distract yourself with because otherwise you will go mad with grief. And so I was distracting myself just by checking my emails every so often while I took care of my grieving kids as well. On October 3rd, I became, I think, the first member who was not a minister to be paired with another member who was not a minister on our side of the House. The whip was very gracious to pair me up. Pairing, Standing Order 44.1, I've sent a letter to the committee in the past committee's makeup in previous parliaments. You should empower members, not the whips. Let us pair ourselves with gentlemen and ladies in other caucuses who we build a relationship over the years. Hybrid parliament makes it impossible to build those relationships one-to-one, the very intimate interpersonal relationships that we need to have based on trust. I'll remind the committee that the reason you're having this study is because there's a member of this committee, I'm going to name him Greg Fergus, for whom I have a lot of respect for, and who I've built, I think, mutual sense of respect over our years working on the Finance Committee. And this is the reason this committee is able to pursue this study right now. That would not have been able to do over a hybrid Zoom parliament setting. You're just boxes to me on the screen. And when I chaired meetings of the Conservative Caucus, it's 150 plus boxes on a screen. You can't really build relationships like that. I know some people had much fun right before votes. There was camaraderie, people singing, but it's not the same thing as having someone over and discussing. The other thing I wanted to say and put on the record, we are not 338 Service Canada ombudsman person offices. Our purpose in life is not to fix Service Canada problems. That's Service Canada's job. I know many of us find a lot of meaningful work in helping individual constituent case files, but our work is as legislators. Our work is to keep the government accountable, including members of the Liberal Government Caucus, as well as every other caucus. Thank you, Chair, for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmich. Maintenant, on va procéder avec Madame.
Now, Mrs. Larouche, welcome to Prague. You have up to 3 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the members of the committee for hearing me speak today on this important issue of hybrid parliament. I am before you today after 1 week of participation in the 145th interparliamentary session. We were hoping to work on more representative parliaments, working on this issue of gender and sex, and I was there as a new mother. I gave birth last February 13th. Naomi is 13, was born on February the 13th. So I decided to pursue my job with my daughter at my side, and I came back to Parliament last February 28th, first of all with the help of my sister and my spouse. For me, it's an issue linked to democracy. I studied political science, and I believe that accountability of the government is not always well served by virtual parliament. The presence of all MPs to represent our constituents is important. informal meetings, follow-up in person on the Hill among colleagues demonstrates this. I know that networking is very important for women because oftentimes they are isolated upon becoming mothers, and this can hinder their career. And I studied this when I was working in the community as responsible for a project working on women and poverty. But for sure, it is difficult on the Hill. It would be nice to have a daycare for babies and children, to have rooms dedicated to families, to have access to these types of services. The Parliament should improve its practices to support young parents. In other countries, parliaments have adapted to family realities of women. Even some have a daycare service within the Parliament. Each political party has a role to play in order to help in accompanying women, whether it be access to physical resources, family rooms, or better flexibility on behalf of parties. Because the role of a mother, I've been doing this for 8 months now, and why would this not be compatible with my role as an MP? And this is the message. We should show the example to the rest of society that is possible for a woman to be a mother and to exercise this function. We have to modernize our institution where we sit in order to have a place for women and mothers with more flexibility in schedules and more physical resources. Parliament should adopt concrete inclusion measures. Otherwise, we will not be able to recruit more women. I would love to answer your questions. Thank you.
Merci, Madame. Et maintenant, we'll go on
Thank you.
to Ms. Jean Yip. Welcome to committee, up to 3 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me. This is personally very difficult for me as it brings up memories that I have put away. But it is so important for me to be here because we have an opportunity to create a path that is both more compassionate and more practical. My late husband, Arnold Chan, was the previous member of Parliament for Scarborough Agincourt. He became ill while in office with nasopharyngeal cancer, more commonly known as head and neck cancer. Arnold passed away 5 years ago. Exhausting as it was, Arnold traveled back and forth. His cancer treatments were in Toronto, but he felt the need to be in Ottawa to be present for his job, including as the Deputy Government House Leader. He sat on this very committee. Arnold was committed to upholding his parliamentary duties in Ottawa right to the end. This meant he had to be there in person. Even though it compromised his health, Arnold pushed himself. He did not want to let his constituents or his colleagues down. Arnold spoke at this committee even when he needed constant water because physically speaking was so difficult. He absolutely loved what he was doing. As a result, I had to split my time with an increasingly terminally ill husband in Ottawa and my 3 boys at home. It was the worst time of my life. My children were losing their father, and I was losing my best friend and husband. Arnold needed to focus his energy on getting through the day instead of traveling back and forth to Ottawa. He was fragile and immune compromised, but risked further sickness by being physically present in Parliament. My children should have had more time with their father, and Arnold should have been better able to fulfill his commitments as MP. Having the virtual option would have helped him manage his health and given him more time with the family. Time is so precious, and it never can be regained. Now, as the MP, being a single parent makes any job tougher. You have to run twice as fast. In fact, every Sunday, I would not sleep for 24 hours in order to buy groceries, organize the week's meals, help with homework, laundry, pay the bills, all the necessities of managing a household. Anyone who has ever had life happen would have appreciated a hybrid option. I regret that my 3 boys became independent much earlier than they should have been. It was not easy on them, and I miss some of my children's special moments. Again, the time lost cannot be made up. Lastly, I would like to say my testimony here today would not have been possible without hybrid support. I must be in the riding to appear in person for an important hearing. I cannot think of a better use of hybrid than to allow me to participate at this committee and to represent my constituents at the hearing tonight. I would like to close with a quote from Arnold in his last speech to the House. We have to listen to each other. In doing so, we will make this place a stronger place. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Now we will enter into 6-minute rounds. Just a reminder, comments and questions from everyone should go through the chair. And we start with Mr. Calkins. 6 minutes to you.
Madam Chair, if I promise to behave, can I just speak directly to our colleagues? Is that okay? All right. So thank you very much, Carol, for your presentation. I actually found it quite interesting. So I want to ask you a few questions first, and I'll probably move on to one of our other colleagues. But you talked specifically about surgeries and illnesses and your personal experience with some of your health matters. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for flights. I'll just be honest, because we choose when we fly, and if we choose to leave last minute and we end up late for House of Commons, that's on us. But I do get the fact that you are also in a rural area that's probably quite a ways away and difficult to get here at times, and that's sometimes true for guys like me from Alberta as well. But I want to ask you about the whip approval part that you had in your notes. So do you think there should be a very specific circumscribed use of hybrid parliament? And do you think that the whips should be the ones that are involved in approving that?
May I? So at this point in time, I'm not sure about other parties. I mean, if I'm going to be away from Ottawa, I have to let my whip's office know, and I have to get permission. And so I would tend to think that, you know, with as we move forward, and I would tend to think that now this is probably happening as well, is that, you know, we are required to be here unless we have permission from the whip to be away for special reasons. And so I would certainly agree that, you know, there is a role for the virtual parliament to continue in some, like the hybrid parliament, to continue in some shape or form. And I think that it is the responsibility of PROC and of our you know, the parties themselves to look at, okay, so how do we who gives the approval for this? And I would tend to think it would be the whip's office that would be giving the approval to say, yes, okay, you can do this because you've had surgery and you can't come here, or, you know, you've missed your flight. You know, it's not nowadays. I'm sure that I know that you fly as well. And what I can tell you is that, you know, often I've had to either jump in the car, and I've been lucky to be able to do this, but Miss Jones wouldn't be able to do that, is jump in the car and drive here and get here in time.
And yeah, flights are not as good as they used to be from Alberta either. I think it's a problem across the country. There's no doubt about it. Do you, as a member of the speakership, would you say that as a matter of accountability, if members of parliament are choosing to use virtual or use hybrid and not attend Parliament, let's say hypothetically there wasn't circumscribed rules on just it was up to the MP to decide how they wanted to do that. Let's say they had the whip's approval to be attending virtually from their constituency that week. Let's just say that hypothetical. Do you think that from an accountability perspective, that the House of Commons should be tracking whether somebody's voting remotely, whether they're voting in person, whether they're attending or logging in virtually, or whether they're speaking in person? And do you think that that should be something that should be reported to the public?
Well, I think that the public is able to see it for themselves. As far as for reporting, again, I think that would be up to PROC, what they would decide as you do your study as to how you would like to see that. Again, I think that, you know, for special circumstances, it is the responsibility of each party to have those prescribed guidelines. I know we currently had it. We had it before virtual Parliament, and we have it. We still have it now. And so, if I'm going to be away, I would need to get permission from the whip's office to be away. And you know, I am expected to participate virtually unless I happen to have a doctor's appointment at that time, that at question period time or whatever. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, there is a huge role for the hybrid parliament to play. We are in that technology world now, and you know, I don't think that anybody is. Hopefully, nobody is abusing it. I think that everybody who can be here is here, unless they have special circumstances. And I know that every party has been using it even though that they can be here right now. So I don't know what their circumstances are as to why they're not here, and they're participating virtually. As Mrs. Yip said, she's got probably electoral reform hearings tonight, I would assume.
I only have a little bit of time, Carol, so I'll let them speak for themselves if that's okay, but thank you for your answer. Tom, a question for you about your pairing suggestion. It is in the standing orders. The interesting comment I heard from you was that you didn't think that the whip should be involved in approving a pairing if you find a colleague from another caucus. For example, you and I are in the opposition if we found a government member to pair with us. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more, please?
Sure. So in the United Kingdom, they have a system that's based on just the honor code, and it's had problems in the past. But two members can pair, and then you can just go and inform the whips that you are paired for whatever length of time you need the pairing for. Pairing has been used routinely in the past, but in the early 1990s, Standing Order 44-1 was changed in order to include the whips. And since then, the whips have almost exclusively had control of it. But over the decades, as whips change, and you know this, having been a former whip, there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be downloaded from whip to whip to whip as that role changes. And I just think that us as members, we are able to find members whom we agree with, we build a relationship over time with, that we would, based on simply a handshake agreement, can inform the clerks and the whips after the fact for us to be paired for a vote, because the system, the way it works right now, there's all those books and binders on the table in the chamber. Those are not just for decorations; they're actually useful. One of those binders is a pairing binder, and within it you have to sign. The whips have to sign the name, not the members.
Thank you. Mrs. Sahota, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really wish we had so much more time than what we do with all of the witnesses today. The testimony thus far has been really interesting and rich. I'll start with MP Yip. MP Yip, I got the chance to serve with Arnold on this very committee, and I miss him very much and his contributions that he made. I remember during a lot of those committee hearings a little bit of what you referenced about the need for having to have water, or the fact that he wasn't feeling well on many occasions during committee, but yet still had to sit there. It was very difficult to watch him in the later days, and it was almost even inhumane. And I know he wanted to be here. He wanted to participate because this place was so important to him. But you could physically see his health deteriorating, and I actually felt like the best place would have been to be resting, and perhaps he could have had more time with his sons. I don't know, but I was wondering whether you had any more comments to make as to any proposals you would like this committee to undertake, given the testimony you gave today.
Thank you. I do believe that after my personal experience watching Arnold deteriorate, watching the stress that it placed on our family, that allowing hybrid to continue with all its flexibilities would be very helpful, not just for those who have medical issues, but also those, as Ms. Jones has testified, who live far away and have a large riding, and it can open up more possibilities for those who can consider running, bring younger people as members, and also to support a better work-life balance.
What do you think about
more time?
What do you think about the idea of pairing? Like how long do you think, given that type of a health circumstance, would Arnold have needed at home, and would it have been easy to find another member to pair with? Considering pairing always requires two people, we may not have, it just comes to mind, doubles in the house always given the same circumstance or the same length of time that might be needed for a member.
I don't. I think maybe pairing may work for some circumstances, but not for longer term issues, like a health issue, or if you have to take a couple of weeks, maybe to stay home with a child or with an elderly parent, the coordination alone is difficult. I think all of us who have to do trades for when we are away from committee, or if we have to go away for a conference or so forth, it's difficult enough just to find somebody to substitute your spot, and never mind to try to coordinate on a longer term. And that is where going hybrid or having hybrid provides the flexibility.
Does pairing provide the opportunity, which I know Arnold appreciated very much, to be able to participate or represent your constituents at that time?
I think that it would have just been short term, the pairing, but not provided a greater, I guess, I don't want to say, well, comfort really, in knowing that there is somebody that is going to be there for the longer term, because you want somebody. The hybrid actually provides some assurance that you can be there if you want, or you can find other means. I just feel that it would have made the situation for our family much more amenable. And I'm sorry. I just need a moment.
How much more time do I have then?
I think it will, I'll just say this. I think with the flexibility of hybrid, it will help those to serve to be healthier, both physically and mentally, and for all of us to do the job that we love. Thank you.
1 minute.
My next question goes to MP Commitch. You had referenced the use of pairing in terms of the UK using the practice. The UK also is wondering if you were aware that the UK also has a practice of proxy voting. Were you aware of that? Okay. Now, proxy voting is a method by which, if you are ill, or you have to take maternity leave or bereavement leave, it gives you the ability to participate and actually register your vote. Were you aware of that? So that does give those MPs in the UK a lot more ability to participate while they're not there, rather than just pairing off and not being a part of Parliament during that time. And I tend to agree with you in terms of feeling that members should be present as often as possible in Parliament because it creates a good network and bond. But do you feel it's better for them to at least be visible on a box and be able to participate vocally when something like that occurs, rather than, or instead, just not be there at all?
We are at time.
Could I just get a yes or no?
That's a lot to ask from that long question.
Madam
It's
Chair,
just a yes
can
or
I just
no. Is
answer
it
with it? It
better to have
depends.
them participate
Sure.
rather than not participate at
depends.
all?
It depends is your answer. Sounds like the or option. Okay, Madame Goudreau, jusqu'à 6 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, d'entrée de jeu, j'aimerais...
Thank you, and I'd like to offer my sincere condolences to Mrs. Yip. How do we pronounce her name? Mrs. Yip. I helped my father for over 10 years when he was ill, and there's no words for this. Same with MP Kmiec. There are no words. There are no words to to describe the loss of a child. Madam Chair, I'd like to hear more on some elements explained by my colleague, Mrs. Larouche. She spoke about networking, and this is something that is a little bit more difficult for women, and so I would like to have a little bit more clarity on this. Yes, as I was saying, this was at the heart of the work that I did, issues around women and poverty. Without networking, it's very difficult to advance some files and to even advance one's career. Behind my screen, if I'm at home, I can't be on the Hill meeting representatives of an association or speak to colleagues. And so this is crucial. When I'm here on Parliament Hill, I can call the babysitter or my spouse to say, I'm going to take an extra half an hour, I need to have a meeting, and I'm able to make files move forward more quickly. So when we were talking about lack of resources, a few elements were raised, Madam Chair. I would like to know what are other elements, because even the MPs who were saying, yes, of course, we're not able to offer all these types of services, but I'd like to have more detail on this as well. Well, it's really important, and we saw this. Quebec was a precursor. They put into place a network that allowed more women to go back into the workplace and to be able to have a safe space where the child could be cared for, or even a family room. My spouse could have benefited from that rather than, instead of staying at home and suffering through the entire mental load that comes with that. We've seen this during the pandemic. As VP of the Committee on the Status of Women, we studied the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women, and we saw that being home with telework, managing the home, the children has had an impact on women's mental health. And to have a separation between the workplace and the time that I can spend with my daughter, this is important as well, to find to strike a work-life balance. So these are resources, and as I was saying, there are some parliamentarians. These are things that have happened elsewhere in the world, and it allows young women to exercise their role as MPs and mothers. Yes, in a testimony before this committee, someone says, well, maybe you can do more behind a screen, but what is the advantage and the disadvantage to be in person? And when you have a child and you want to take care of your child, take time, what is the impact of being behind a screen rather than coming here and participating? So the responsibility that each MP has at the House of Commons. Well, as I was saying, it's an issue of accountability. When we're on the Hill, we can have informal exchange with colleagues. We can speak with colleagues in the hall rather than being at home. And to see a square on a screen, we can do follow-ups in person. But it's especially that being at home with a young child does have an impact because it puts on extra pressure. And for me, it's really important. And this is also at the heart of the issue. And I heard some comments following my trip to Rwanda saying that that wasn't a place for a child. I shouldn't have had my baby with me. I should have stayed at home. I heard these comments that I was using my child, and instead of saying, well, because I'm a good mother, I can't be a good MP, or because I'm a good MP, I can't be a good mother. And so when I was talking about space, the limit when we're at home, and we saw this during the pandemic, there was no distinction between the time spent at work and the time that we had for ourselves. Behind the screen, we have a tendency to add on hours, and it's important to draw the line. And this is why I was talking about a more adapted schedule. As a mother, I've participated in debates until very late. And I'd even go further to say this is a minority government, and some people forget it. And our constituents have asked us to negotiate with government, that we should agree. And these types of agreements cannot be done behind a screen. I was on a diplomatic mission. All the discussions we had with colleagues informally in the hall, this would have been impossible behind a screen. And in a minority government, this is an important issue as well. Madam Chair, I only have a few seconds left. So when we say that presence makes it so that we avoid escaping responsibility or eschewing responsibility, when we should, in fact, be there to ask questions, to receive answers, and to make files move ahead. So in your opinion, is this hybrid format something that that impacts on accountability? Yes, because we can't have the same impact. And when we're representing citizens in our ridings, and to hear what they have to tell us, well, if we stay in our riding bubble, without bringing this to the House and see with our colleagues how we can better serve our constituents and see how we can have legislation that will be a representative of what we're trying to do. So we're trying to help people in our ridings.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I want to thank all the folks that are here to testify. I think for myself, as we go through this, I'm really interested in having concrete discussions about how we can come together on this, because I don't think it is an all or nothing. I personally like being here better. I think it's really important. I know since the very beginning that when I would speak and I would hear from other parties that they would have similar issues, we were able to work together, and I think that will always be important, and I'm very aware of that. And I also acknowledge that if people are having severe health challenges or caring for someone and they cannot leave their home, that I don't want to silence that voice. I think it's very important when you are elected that your voice is heard in this place. And things happen. You know, I think of other testimony and Carol's as well today, where they talk about real health issues that mean you cannot travel. You cannot. And so does that mean that your voice is silenced for that period of time? And I think voting is part of it, but that is not all it is. It's also the House work, the committee work. We saw people do tremendous work and speeches in the House of Commons in their committees virtually because we had that tool. So I'm very hopeful that we can come together and have really concrete discussions about what works well, what are our concerns, and how do we do this in a way that increases inclusion and doesn't exclude. So I'm going to come to you, Ms. Jones. You said you had 4 main points, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to actually share that with the committee since you didn't have enough time in your presentation.
Thank you very much, MP Blaney. So first of all, much of what I had there has been raised by my colleagues. I, too, unfortunately, have lost a child. During COVID, I lost my brother. So I know how important it was for me to have access to hybrid parliament so I could be with my family, to be with his kids at that time as well. And I really felt that if that option wasn't there for me, that my privileges as an MP would have been compromised as well, because it gave me that added opportunity to still be able to participate in Parliament and support my family and them support me at a time when I needed it. I'm also a cancer survivor, and I went through cancer in politics, and I went through other major surgical procedures, as I heard Carol talk about, and a number of our colleagues have. And I listened to Jean this morning, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to hear her story. Because one of the things I think that hybrid allows us to do, and that is to continue to participate, have input, even if it's at a distance. It mightn't be the preferred option. I, like you, I love being with my colleagues. I love being in the House of Commons, being in person for committees. But realistically, we have lives that sometimes are not able to allow us to do the things we really want to do, but we can still participate. Hybrid allows us the opportunity. I really believe the question for the committee should be, how do we incorporate a hybrid model going forward? And when does it come into play? How does it support MPs? I don't think it should be a question of whether we use it or whether we don't use it. I think the question is how we use it to strengthen Parliament. There are corporations all over the world being run with people's boxes on a screen. That's how they're running the largest companies in the world today. I'm not suggesting everything we do as lawmakers in Canada can be done over a computer screen. But I tell you, if you can run a corporation that way, surely we can accommodate a member of Parliament who's had a child, who has family issues, who's suffering through disease and medical treatments, who've lost a loved one in their lives through temporary circumstances where they've required that support. And I think that is something that we can all do without compromising our responsibility as legislators or our responsibility to our constituents. So I think the question needs to change to start with. Other than that, I think as parliamentarians, we have an opportunity to lead a new standard of how Parliament works in Canada, using new technology, using the tools that we have available to us. We're not the only Parliament in the world that is going to be looking at models like this, but we've tested a model. It seems to have worked. How do we take what we've done and incorporate it going forward as a new practice? And I think that we can set a standard just by what we've been through in 2 years to show the rest of the world how parliaments can be diversified. In doing so, we're going to attract better people to politics. I believe nothing wrong with the people we have now, but we all know how hard it is to get someone to run for office these days. And that's a serious point. I mean, we're all.
So I've only got a little bit of time, so I just wanted to give the last minute to Carol. You talked about just the amount of foot surgery and that you don't always know when it's going to happen. I know that's a challenge too. If you could just talk a little bit about how this opens up opportunity for you to participate as an MP.
Well, again, as I've mentioned, every party has used it and continues to use it. So I don't know, again, for their circumstance. During COVID, I also was taking care of my grandsons because both my daughter and my son-in-law are essential workers. She's a respiratory therapist and he's a correctional worker. So I do know what it's like to have young kids and having to balance. And I understand what Madame Larouche is referring to. But again, when we look at we do need better resources here on the Hill, for childcare. But when those kids start going to school, and if we have single parents as well, it's very challenging. And so I firmly believe that there is a role to continue with hybrid. And again, I think that there needs to be specific guidelines as to who authorizes MPs to be away from Ottawa.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Cooper, up to 6 minutes. Welcome to Pruk. Up to 5 minutes. Sorry.
Minutes,
We'll
okay.
try to keep it to 4. But
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Great to be here. I'm going to direct my questions to Tom. One of the recurring themes that we have heard about the hybrid model is that it provides an opportunity for members to participate when it's impossible or very difficult for them to be here, oftentimes due to health issues. Ms. Blaney mentioned voting, but she went on to say it's more than voting, and she said that hybrid parliament ensures that those members' voices are not silenced. So could you just, I'd be interested in your comments because you have, I think, a bit of a different perspective.
It's definitely different. That I believe the hybrid parliament will nullify that distinction between a constituency week and a sessional week when you're supposed to be here doing the work of a parliamentarian. There's really one thing that a parliamentarian can do that nobody else can do from your riding, and it's vote. You can't cast a vote. You want to participate in public debate, you can go onto Twitter, you can go on Facebook. Many members here participate in Twitter debates, I know that. So you can always participate in public debate from the comfort of your home if you so choose to. But voting up until hybrid parliament was the only thing you couldn't do. Voting is the key. It's the central role of what a parliamentarian does, which is why many of my comments are based around it. And that work-life balance expectation. During the pandemic, I chaired our meetings on Wednesdays when 2 of my kids were doing hybrid school. So I would have their screens about diagonally behind. I would sit at the back of the room. I'd have one child in the kitchen on a stool with their computer, with their headset on, and another one in front so I could see what was happening on their screen so they wouldn't switch their screens and start playing a video game while you're supposed to be in school. While I had a younger child who we held him back from kindergarten so he wouldn't have to go and wear a mask in kindergarten, which I thought was pointless. So I would have to make sure he's not also then turning on the TV. That is not work-life balance. I'm trying to parent 3 kids at the same time where they're supposed to be in school, and I'm sitting behind them trying to chair a meeting of 150 people where at any moment it could go off the rails because we are conservatives, strong opinions. Well, the kids might not appreciate the hard parenting. The other thing it'll do, in my view as well, is we all get this from our constituents. I have the 2nd largest riding in Canada by population size. I get invited to a lot of events, to a lot of homes for dinners, just to participate in community events. if I'm then told I also have to do Zoom Parliament and participate in that, that distinction is broken. Many people will say, I know you are busy, I know you have to travel a lot, I know you are away, so whenever possible, we arrange those for constituency weeks. But why do we have constituency weeks if we're going to have a hybrid Parliament model? Why don't we then sit longer? There is no distinction then between the two things. If I can do a Zoom meeting on a Sunday just to keep doing my work, then that takes away the Sunday as a family day, essentially. If I can do it from a lounge at an airport, or if I can do it from a vehicle while driving. Many members have started to do that as well. They participate in Parliament from their vehicles. You can see that someone is driving them, or they are driving themselves and their phone is precariously perched somewhere in their vehicle. There is no work-life balance possible, I don't believe, in a hybrid Parliament setting.
Right. And with respect to voting, do you support a continuation of the app?
I would like to see us do away with the app and move towards pairing, where the member is empowered to pair their vote. Like, the reason I love pairing, and I've sent a letter, like I said, to previous Proc Chair, and Madam Chair, this is what I believe on voting. It will force members to get to know each other across party lines. I've tried that, to get to know members from other political parties, to get to know them to the level where I trust them, that if I make a handshake agreement with them on committee business or about any other business of the House, that I can trust them on the matter. There are a few of those, I think, across all parties, and I have co-sponsored motions and private members' bills from members of the NDP and members of the Liberal Party as well. Those relationships are built person to person, face to face, over time. It's very difficult to do in a hybrid setting, especially when you're asking me to build relationships with members of other provinces who we are. This is a very large country. There's a huge distinction with what's a conservative on the West Coast, what's a conservative on the East Coast. The same applies for New Democrats, the Liberal Party, the Green Party. All of us are very different coast to coast.
How much time? 30 seconds. And what about what are your thoughts on proxy voting?
I'd be open to doing a system of proxy voting. The reason I go back to pairing is pairing already exists in the standing orders. So you don't need to create new standing orders to create proxy voting.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Fergus, up to 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Puis,
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I'd like to congratulate and thank all my colleagues here today. Thank you for your testimony. One thing that I had noticed in each and every one of your stories is that you've spoken. At the heart of your stories are human stories. Your situations, our situations as parliamentarians, is very complicated. We've heard very heart-rending testimony by Mrs. Yip and Mr. Knicht as to your family situations, the challenges faced by Mrs. Hughes, Mrs. Jones, and Mrs. LaRouche. It seems to me, and I do appreciate Mr. Kmich's answer to Mrs. Sahota's question when he asked, do you think that a proxy vote, vote par procuration, if a proxy vote well, he said it depends. That's what he said. It depends, and I think that's correct. I think everything depends. We've all gone through a remarkable situation over the past 2 or 3 years, and for health reasons, we've had to distance ourselves from each other. And as many Canadians who had the ability, and some people did not, their work required for them to be in the presence of others. And we've all spent time elsewhere. But when I look at the hybrid system now, there are very few MPs who are not here to participate in person. The large majority are here. Most people around this table, most MPs, members of the committee, are all present here today. And since September, this has been the case. So it seems to me, When I take up Mrs. Jones's words, it seems that it is being used as a tool, an extra tool, for exceptional situations. If something has happened, if there's a serious event, or perhaps there might be something serious that happens within our ridings. And as an MP, yes, it's important to vote, and yes, it's important to be present for camaraderie purposes, but it's also important to be close to our constituents and to be there for them in order to demonstrate our solidarity within our communities. So, Mrs. Jones, if I were to ask you a question, you said that it was very difficult to get here, especially after the pandemic, that you have less options for flying here. Could you speak to this? My riding is next door. It's across the river. I take the 41 and I come here, and it's very easy for me. But I'll give you the floor now.
Thank you, Fergus, and I appreciate the question. So when you live in a northern riding like I do, and I know that Rachel and some of the others at the table and many in the House of Commons, when we sign up to be a parliamentarian, we know the distance. What happens is that there are factors that change that impacts our work, and that's what's happening in my case right now with the shift in airlines, the lack of transportation capacity to get between here and Ottawa. So when I look at my schedule, other than the constituent weeks, I don't get to go to my riding on the weekends. Because in order to do my parliamentary duties here, I can't be in my constituency on the weekends. Physically impossible based on the airline schedules and how I have to travel to get there and get back. I need that extra day in order to be able to do it. Is that an extenuating circumstance? I don't know. But if it was a hybrid option, I could at least opt for that option 1 or 2 days out of a month so I get that weekend to go back to my riding. But I really see hybrid as an option for MPs that are really going through challenging and difficult circumstances. We're all human beings. We're all going to face those things in our lives. Cases and stories like everyone have heard here today. You go all over the country, employers today are looking at how they can make a better workplace environment for their employees, how they can make a better situation for them and their families and get good productivity out of them on the job.
Thank you.
We need to be doing the same as a parliament.
Thank you for that exchange. Madame Goudreau, une question très vite, s'il vous plaît.
Tantôt, Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair, I asked a question on accountability, and in Mr. Larouche's testimony, she was talking about a hybrid parliament and that there was less accountability. So I would like to speak to, how could a government potentially issue their responsibilities in a hybrid context? Thank you. There are two things. As I was saying, the hybrid parliament creates a distinction between the Prime Minister, ministers, and MPs. And when we ask a question, if it's a difficult file, a minister behind a screen doesn't have the same level of accountability. The work of an MP is not only during question period. I'll give an example. I was elected and I had to follow up a request for a program, and I could cross the floor and directly discuss with the minister. And so in a hybrid format, I cannot have this discussion with the minister. Our role as an MP is important. And so it's this level of accountability that is possible, and these types of discussions in the hallway, in person, on the Hill. When we are in our ridings, hearing testimony is one thing, but people expect that their MP is going to bring forth their issue to the House of Commons, that their voice will be heard. And I'd like to come back to this. And also, if I have the opportunity to end with this, is the double standard for women. When we talk about a role as a mother and an MP, for me it's important to have a distinction between household responsibilities and the perverse way that we see our role. And there has to be a clear distinction. When we are home with the child, and studies have shown the disproportionate effects of the pandemic on women because of this. They've had a lot more mental load to carry. And once again, of course, there are some fathers that have also had this mental load, and the distinction applies to them as well. And I would like to give my most sincere sympathies for all those who have testified today, those who have lost loved ones. So we would like to thank Mrs. Hughes, Mrs. LaRouche, Mrs. Kimmich, Mrs. Jones. Thank you for your time. And we wish you a wonderful day. We will suspend for a moment and continue with the second panel.
panel on our study of hybrid proceedings. Pour notre deuxième panel, veuillez accueillir.
For our second panel, we will welcome Mr. Arnott from the Ontario Legislature and the Honourable Derek Bennett, Chair of the Newfoundland and Labrador Legislature. Mr. Arnott, we'll begin with you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair Chagger. Good afternoon. I'm Ted Arnott. I'm the Member of Provincial Parliament for Wellington Halton Hills and the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to address the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, discussing our parliamentary proceedings during the COVID-19 pandemic and how we responded here at Queen's Park. Like all Canadians who were asked to begin working from home in March of 2020, the Ontario Legislature similarly adjourned its business until such time that the government House Leader indicated to me as Speaker that it was in the public interest for members to reconvene. When they did so on May the 12th, 2020, the House adopted a motion that allowed committees to use electronic means of communication when they were authorized to resume meeting. The motion specified that committee members, witnesses, and/or staff would not be required to be in the same physical place. This allowed for remote committee participation by members and staff without the need to be physically present in a committee room at Queen's Park, which was unprecedented at the time at the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. While committees were authorized to meet virtually, the chamber proceedings remained in person throughout, with some modifications to the voting procedures and the number of members present in the chamber, in line with the public health advice we were receiving from Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health. Therefore, the bulk of this presentation will focus on committees, as they did have some hybrid components. In total, the 9 standing committees and 1 select committee conducted 328 meetings in the hybrid virtual format, before returning to exclusively in-person meetings as of March 1st, 2022, this year. Hybrid committee meetings were still anchored in a committee room in the legislative building, with the chair or acting chair and a committee clerk required to be physically present. Zoom was selected as the hosting platform for these hybrid committee meetings, and Assembly staff from different branches worked together to conduct exhaustive testing in preparation for the change. Security, connectivity, user experience, and ease were all tested at various times. Guideline documents, manuals, and tip sheets were developed for members, staff, and witnesses in order to ease the transition to the new format. Each committee room was fitted with 4 TVs and extra cameras so that all participants in the room could view all the remote participants. In keeping with physical distancing best practices, members and staff present in the committee rooms were encouraged to sit apart from one another. Furthermore, each committee agreed that the members of the public attending as witnesses should appear virtually. Each committee held a pre-meeting 15 minutes before their scheduled start time for the chair to confirm the attendance of all members participating by Zoom and work out any technical difficulties that might have arisen. All Zoom participants, excluding MPPs, were required to join an administrative confirmation meeting hosted on a separate Zoom call by a procedural services assistant. The assistant confirmed the participant's identification, conducted a technical audio and video quality check, and then provided the main committee Zoom link to join the meeting. This ensured that only registered participants had access to the committee's Zoom meeting link, and it enhanced the security of the meeting. Over time, as the use of Zoom became the norm, the role of the administrative clerk was no longer needed. However, the practice of conducting an administrative confirmation meeting for all external participants was maintained, as it had been effective in ensuring secure meetings. Committees also began using their SharePoint site to securely distribute all relevant committee documents to members. This included written submissions, notices, agendas, and even confidential committee documents. The site prompted members to log in with their personal assembly credentials to access the documents to which they would have view-only access. The order of the House that allowed for hybrid committee meetings provided that the chair shall ensure that the standing orders and regular committee practices are observed to the greatest extent possible, making adjustments to committee procedures only where necessary to facilitate the physical distancing and electronic participation of members, witnesses, and staff. Adjusted committee procedures included the following: confirmation of identity and presence in Ontario. The chair was required by order of the House to verify the identity of members participating remotely and to confirm that they were physically present in Ontario in order for them to be considered in attendance and part of the quorum. This was largely done during the pre-meeting, but was also done during committee proceedings as necessary.
Thank you.
Recognition to speak.
Thank you, Speaker Arnott. We look forward to hearing more from you in the question and answer round. Now I'll go to Speaker Bennett.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Chair.
Good afternoon, Chair, Speaker Arnott, and other committee members. As you said, my name is Derek Bennett. I'm the Speaker for the House Assembly for Newfoundland and Labrador, and also the member of the District of Louisbourg-Tullingate. Good afternoon. Before discussing Newfoundland and Labrador's Assembly approach to virtual proceedings, I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs for the invitation to speak today. I certainly welcome the opportunity to speak about the provisions and accommodations put in place by our legislature during the COVID-19 pandemic. Following the initial lockdown in Newfoundland and Labrador, COVID-19, the House met twice in person, once in March and once in May, for one-day sittings to deal with urgent legislation matters related to the pandemic. For both of these sittings, the House met with just a quorum of 10 members, along with the necessary tables officers, the Sergeant at Arms. We did not have any pages present, and the galleries were closed to visitors, and the press gallery was restricted to half its normal capacity. When the House met in person on May the 5th, 2020, it passed a motion appointing a select committee governing virtual proceedings, which was tasked with determining the manner in which the House may conduct virtual proceedings during the COVID-19 pandemic. The resolution provided authority for select committee to meet virtually to determine the manner in which virtual proceedings of the House may be held. It also provided that the measures recommended by the select committee and adopted by the House would also, as appropriate, appropriate to the meetings of other committees and the House of Assembly Management Commission. Prior to this, there was no authority for any virtual proceedings. The Select Committee included the members of the Standing Orders Committee, the House leaders, and one unaffiliated member. The order of reference adopted by the House provided that the Select Committee's report had to be tabled no later than July the 1st, 2020, and once tabled, it was deemed to have been presented to and adopted by the House of Assembly on that date. The Select Committee's report included 9 recommendations to provide for virtual proceedings, in addition to procedural guidance on the following matters: participation, dress code and attire, background and virtual setup, quorum, place of speaking, audio-visual functions, recognition of speaker, sitting times, points of order and privilege, admission of strangers, discipline, and voting. These provisions were in place until December 2020. However, in September 2020, the standing orders were changed to provide for virtual proceedings as circumstances warranted. The decision to proceed virtually is made by the Speaker in consultation with the House leaders. Following
We will suspend
to
for
readiness to ensure readiness from a technological, procedural, and logistical perspective to ensure that virtual proceedings could be successfully supported and facilitate should they be required. Much of testing focused on the integration of virtual participants with members attending in person in the chamber, as well as integration with our broadcasts. While the capabilities and authority exists for General Assemblies to meet in a virtual hybrid configuration, it has never been used. However, it was used extensively by committees of the House and the Management Commission. The daily proceedings of House have a fluid nature to them. As an example, oral question period is allocated in blocks of time, and the caucuses determine rotation of questions within their block. In a virtual proceeding, this fluidity is not possible. In particular, I note the first statement in recommendation number 1 of the Select Committee's report states, it is preferred that all sittings of House be conducted with all members physically present. Since June 2020, favorable epidemiology combined with sufficient physical space in the chamber has allowed Newfoundland and Labrador Assembly to meet in person and all members to be accommodated. The configuration to accommodate appropriate physical distancing in accordance with health guidelines resulted in various versions of the seating arrangements in the House of Assembly. Other measures to facilitate safe in-person sittings include the requirements for members to speak from a seated position, wearing of masks when not speaking, the suspension of page services, the adoption of a resolution requiring members to be vaccinated, closing of the visitors gallery to the public, and reducing capacity in the press gallery. Further, a provisional standing order was adopted to provide for deferred voting, and to date, that provision has not been used. As was experienced by all of us, the COVID-19 pandemic presented challenges that require significant work and planning to enable the continued function of the legislature, often under tight timelines with various unknown factors and rapidly changing circumstances.
Thank you, Speaker Bennett, for your great words, and we look forward to having an exchange with you during the question and answer period.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now call on Mr. Culkins, up to 6 minutes.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Nader, welcome to PROC, up to 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's great to be back on PROC and be on this august chamber. And thank you, colleagues, for your faith in me as Vice Chair of this wonderful committee. Thank you to our speakers as well, Mr. Speaker Bennett, Mr. Speaker Arnott, for joining us and your expertise as our provincial counterparts on the matters that are before us. I want to start with Mr. Speaker Arnott. Just to clarify, throughout the pandemic, the Legislative Assembly itself never met virtually. It was constantly in person. But if you could just explain briefly what measures were taking place in terms of the numbers within the Assembly during that time to ensure that it remained safe at that point in time.
You're on mute, Mr. Speaker.
Can you hear me?
Ken.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Mr. Nader. Yes. Throughout the pandemic, the Ontario Legislative Assembly continued to sit in person as a whole when the House sat. And as I said, the committees in many cases were sitting virtually, but the House as a whole sat in person. We had to take, of course, a long list of new approaches in order to facilitate this and make sure that it was done safely. Most days during, I would say, the worst of the pandemic, we had fewer than 30 members of provincial parliament in the chamber at any given time. In many cases, the caucuses had taken an approach to cohort so that if COVID-19 went through a caucus, there'd be a replacement group that could come in. We did the same thing with the table staff to ensure that we could carry on even if there was an outbreak of COVID-19 amongst the caucuses. But I would want to say that our staff were enormously creative in order to ensure that we would have the practices and procedures necessary to be able to continue to function in person, and we were able to do so largely safely.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker Arnott. Not to put you on the spot or to highlight how long you've been around, but you have some great experience as a member of provincial parliament, now entering your fourth decade of service in the Ontario Legislative Assembly, 33 years, I believe, almost, as a member of provincial parliament. In your experience, in that time that you've served as an MPP, I was wondering if you could comment on some of the informal or unofficial roles that an MPP plays within the legislative precinct, within the Pink Palace, as it's often called, those informal conversations in the corridors, over a cup of coffee, grabbing a minister in and out of question period. What could you just reflect on some of the importance that you've seen over your time at Queen's Park?
Well, I think you've made a very good point, John. It's hugely valuable for elected members to be able to interact in the chamber, outside of the chamber, in the corridors, in the lobbies, to have those face-to-face conversations can be very, very helpful in terms of ensuring that that members are informed, that they're able to share best practices and ideas, as well as for members to be able to represent their constituents. Through my time as a member, when I've been advocating for my constituency, in many cases I would approach ministers, whether I was on the government side or whether I was on the opposition benches, and speak to them privately. And that was a very important way of advancing an issue on behalf of constituents. And without that opportunity, I think it would have been far more difficult to achieve some of the things that we were able to get for our riding over the years.
Thank you for that, Mr. Speaker Arnott. I want to turn to Mr. Speaker Bennett to ask a couple questions. Now, unfortunately, your sound did cut out at one point throughout your presentation, and it was at a point where you're talking about reverting to hybrid proceedings if the opportunity was needed, and you were mentioning that it would be a decision made by the Speaker in consultation with the House leaders of the various parties. So I wanted to follow up on that and just clarify that. What type of decision-making process would you go through to determine whether to go back to a hybrid sitting? What would be the considerations that you as Speaker would make when making that decision?
Okay, first of all, thank you for the question. I guess first of all, we would consultate largely with our Chief Medical Officer to determine what the regulation of restriction would be on within the province at the time. Our staff, including, we only have a small team, but we have a mighty team that is here at the clerk's office that has been monitoring the health orders and restrictions throughout the process. So what basically we would be doing then, we would meet as a group first to see what regulation would be put in place. Then we also had a good close working relationship with our government house leaders and our unaffiliated members. So we would engage in them to update them on the procedures and what our intention would be, and largely try to get their support with it. Ultimately, it would be our decision, but we found it was much more valuable if we communicated, and that's the support of other members.
So as we speak, you're meeting entirely in person. Are there any current members or parties pushing for a return to hybrid parliament at this point in time within Newfoundland and Labrador?
No, there's not. No, we're very fortunate. We only have 40 members in our House of Assembly. We have a large legislature, so we were easily able to put a safe seating plan in place that kept our 6-foot physical distance, and so we were fortunate in that matter. So there hasn't been no push for it. However, as I identified, we do use it largely in our committee structure, and that proved to be very valuable. We do have a number of rural MHAs, some that live in Labrador, so flying is always a concern. So within our management commission and other committees, we have used a virtual hybrid procedure much more readily.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Bennett. Mr. Turnbull, up to 6 minutes to you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to both Speaker Arnott and Speaker Bennett for joining us today. I had originally prepared a whole list of questions for Mr. Williamson because of his great research with the Interparliamentary Union. I'll probably reference a few of those in my remarks and questions to Mr. Bennett and Mr. Arnott today, just because I think it's interesting to see what they think, given the fact that Mr. Williamson didn't have a headset that was good enough for us today. I'm hoping that he comes back, by the way, because I think he provides a lot of important testimony, or would provide a lot of important testimony for this study based on the research that they've done. So, Mr. Bennett, I'll go to you. Do you think that the global pandemic provided kind of a catalyst for change in terms of, like I think we've seen our parliament and all parliaments really innovate within the pandemic. Do you think that that's provided a bit of an impetus or catalyst for change within parliaments?
Oh, definitely. I think, especially with the use of virtual hybrid sittings, that it was, I guess, none of us wanted to face COVID-19 or they're going through a pandemic, but it did provide an opportunity for all legislatures to learn and to adjust and to constantly evolve to the challenges that COVID-19 brought. So we had our challenges with it, without a doubt, like every legislature. But our team rolled with the challenges. We came up with new and innovative ideas on how to address those challenges, and we worked quite well with our broadcast team and other teams to ensure that we were able to have proceedings. And
thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to ask a follow-up question. Would you say that those tools and innovations have ongoing utility for parliaments to consider modernizing or adding flexibilities in that could benefit all MHAs or MPPs or MPs at the federal level?
Yes, thank you for the question. But yeah, I do think that there is the ability to use these technologies that we've forced to use over the last 2 years to adapt and to make our legislatures more user-friendly, more family-oriented, and to deal with some of the challenges. If people have health issues or other types of challenges, travel issues, then the opportunities for hybrid virtual sittings could definitely be used in the future.
Thank you. And in terms of business continuity planning, which I think is really important for any legislature or parliament, we've seen in the Interparliamentary Union's work and report that many parliaments around the world had to go above and beyond the business continuity plan that they had in existence prior to the pandemic. So essentially, they've created new business continuity plans and created these innovative digital tools to help enable parliaments of right around the world to continue in the face of a major crisis, but also certainly to adapt and have flexibilities and modernizations within the workplace so that parliaments can be more inclusive, family-friendly, et cetera, et cetera. So would you agree that that's a good thing to continue, Mr. Bennett?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And technology is constantly evolving. So I think as we continue to use virtual hybrid proceedings, if necessary, I think the technology will further advance. And I think it's something I know our legislature will continue to look at upgrading systems as they evolve, and to utilize the system as a virtual hybrid sittings where needed, particularly in the committee mostly, because like I said, we have a vast province. It's the technology is not necessarily as expensive to use, but there's also cost savings that can be seen through by travel and other expenses that it costs to bring members to our capital city.
Thank you. And Mr. Arnott, would you agree with Mr. Bennett's sentiments that, and has the Ontario legislature updated its business continuity plan? And if, you were to experience another pandemic or major crisis of some kind, do you think you'd be able to utilize the tools and innovations that you developed during the pandemic to quickly pivot to hybrid proceedings?
Yeah, first of all, I would indicate I agree with Speaker Bennett and the comments that he just made. The Ontario Legislature does have a robust business continuity plan that we have worked on over the years and is ready to go if ever needed. We also, I think, would agree and concur that as technology continues to evolve and give us opportunities to bring people together, that the legislatures will continue to evolve. But I would add this as well. It's up to the individual legislature, including the House of Commons or the Senate, to make their own decision. And I wouldn't want to suggest
Thank you for that.
That it's up to me to decide.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Last question. So I think we all agree that it's preferred, and many of us would prefer to be here in person. And yet there's extenuating circumstances, and we've heard this from members of Parliament today, but we've also heard it in previous meetings where, people have major health issues, they're traveling great distances, they have caregiver responsibilities, they're grieving a lost loved one. Are these circumstances in which, although preferred to be here physically, that we should be enabling and including and not excluding, in fact, those members of Parliament or MPPs or MHAs in order from participating in debate? Would you agree with that quickly?
Really quickly.
Who's that addressed to?
Mr. Bennett and then Mr. Arnott.
My apologies.
Okay. I don't hear an answer, so
Oh, sorry. No, it's
really quickly because our time is up.
Oh, right now, our legislature right now does it as a collective group, not individual cases. So I do see it being valuable in the future, but right now the Newfoundland Labrador legislature is a collective decision to use virtual hybrid.
Thank you. Madame Gaudreau, jusqu'à 6 minutes.
Bonjour.
Hello, Mr. Speakers. I don't know if you remember me. Mr. Arnott and Mr. Bennett, we met in Charlottetown and Halifax. I'm very pleased to have met you in person. And we have an example, Madam Chair, of an accommodation for a meeting, very short meeting within a committee. And so we've seen technological issues at play. And this being said, I'd like to have your opinion with your expertise as to what our chair mentioned to us a few weeks ago. I'm going to explain further. We see increasingly that there are different aspects on this issue of representation. So we have committees and we also have the House of Commons. I have the impression that we're starting to reach a better understanding as to accountability. What Mr. Rota, the Speaker of the House, was saying is that there could be parameters and circumstances, and this will allow you, Madam Chair, to answer Mr. Turnbull's question, but what would be the measures, the feasible measures, if a hybrid parliament was implemented on a more permanent basis, according to your expertise? Thank you.
On pige au sort, Monsieur Bennett.
Mr. Bennett?
I apologize. I missed a lot of your preamble on the question there.
Je vais la résumer.
I will summarize. If we had parameters at the House of Commons, are you hearing the interpretation?
Speaker Bennett, on the bottom, you'd be choosing the language that you want to be listening to. Do you have it in
Lors
English?
de notre rencontre, on n'a pas pu suffisamment apprendre le français.
You are hearing Madame Gaudreau in English? And you're on mute?
Sorry, my apologies. I am in English. I just could not hear the volume was very low, and I've got everything turned up on high.
Donc, est-ce que vous avez...
So did you understand the question?
Sorry.
Okay.
Je vais être encore plus succinct.
I'll try to be even more succinct, Madam Chair. So my question is that I'd like to have your your opinion as Speaker, because we received a mention from the Speaker of the House that if there was a possibility of having a hybrid format on a more permanent basis, there could be parameters for this, parameters and circumstances. I'd like to have your expert opinion. With all due respect, Mr. Bennett.
So yeah, I think I caught most of it there. I guess you were asking about the parameters around the feasibility and the use of the hybrid during on the long term for the House of Assembly. Yeah, I guess from Newfoundland Labrador's point of view, that we do see the value of the hybrid opportunities that do exist. From a financial point of view, it's definitely has been a valuable resource that we've been using over the last 2 years, particularly mostly within our committee structure. However, we have been able to adapt to utilizing it within the House of Assembly if needed as a whole. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I'll be honest with you. I find the translation very, very low. I'm going to just resort to my clerk for a second. I don't know if she's heard any better. 1 second.
La vérification, Madame la Présidente.
Okay. Oui. Est-ce que vous avez des...
Do you have any questions for Mr. Arnott? Yes, I'll ask the same question of Mr. Arnott. I'm hoping that Mr. Bennett will be able to hear more clearly.
Bonjour.
Yes. Bonjour. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, without question, as discussions continue on the advantages and disadvantages of hybrid parliament and making it a more permanent feature of how we do our business, I think it would be essential that parameters be developed. I think that in the context of the Ontario legislature, if such a discussion were to take place, it would be the House leaders from the various recognized parties that would perhaps take the lead. The Speaker and the staff of the Assembly would provide support to ensure that the discussions were fruitful. And probably there'd be an involvement by a standing committee of the legislature. But I think ideally, if such a course of action were pursued, that it would be best if none of the parties sought partisan advantage, but looked at the broader interests of Parliament in terms of the development of those parameters.
Merci, c'est très large.
That's very broad, but I would invite you, Madam Chair, if you'd allow me, if you have, following my question, if you have elements that would come to mind later on, if possible, for our report that will be written in the following weeks, we would like to receive further information. We heard testimony on accommodation and on ease of access, and testimony was especially on very impactful situations that impacted people and their families. I'd like to hear you speak to this. If there's a major issue and elected members have to be present, do your assemblies have all the tools to allow, for example, parents of children, and if we want to think of succession planning for your institution, so are you going to have special accommodations? Mr. Arnott.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we've done enough at the legislature to support members with young families. For starters, my wife and I have raised 3 children, and we went through this as a family as well through the years. Our boys are now grown, but it is very, very difficult and challenging for members who have young families to be away from home so much. And I think that the legislature here needs to continue to find ways to support those members who have young families. And you're right, there are situations and occurrences where members who would want to be otherwise present in the chamber for debates, for votes, and for the other participation opportunities, including committee service, but might not be able to be because of a family emergency, because of a health issue, any number of things, including an issue or in the riding that compels them to be home. So this is something that all members have to deal with on a regular basis from time to time. And I know that all members would want to be physically present to fully participate, but there are situations and occurrences that arise that make that impossible from time to time. And I think there should be acceptance and awareness on both sides of the House on that, and not trying to seek partisan advantage when someone's sick.
Thank you, Speaker Arnott. Now we'll go to Madame Blaney for up to 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and very grateful to hear from the speakers today. And of course, a special recognition to Speaker Bennett. We just spent some time together in Turkey not too long ago, recognizing the incredible sacrifice of Newfoundlanders and the, of course, last section of the Caribou Trail. So I want to thank you for being here, and it's good to see you again. I think, one of the biggest changes for us that we could have never expected was COVID-19, and we all had to respond to it very rapidly. So I'm just wondering, I'm going to ask both of you the same question. If you could talk a little bit about the impactful lessons of hybrid parliament and committee and share what were the best practices that you found and how it assisted in terms of adapting and modernizing the system to deal with the pandemic, but also just to move forward in the future. And I will start with Speaker Bennett.
Well, good afternoon. Yes, it was great seeing you in Turkey. It was quite the memorable event. COVID-19 obviously was a great learning lesson for all legislatures, and I'm quite sure, like Newfoundland and Labrador, it was constantly evolving, constantly changing, not only with for us, not only with the legislature, but for an election when we had a revert to level 5 one day before our election was being called. So there was some great lessons to learn. And as I said, we only had a small group to work with, but we constantly evolved and improved our systems as new challenges were faced. I guess some of the best practices that we evolved into was obviously the virtual hybrid setting, opening up a lot of opportunities and for us to increase on our meetings and committee meetings and things like that before was very challenging. Committee meetings with such a large province, even though small in numbers, travel for members was always very, very difficult, especially when the House wasn't sitting. So as a result of the virtual hybrid and some of the changes we did to our legislature, then we've readily adapted that procedure and I guess evolved as it evolved. So it's been a great experience, and we learn and we continue to learn from it, and we'll continue to use this virtual hybrid setting.
Thank you so much, Speaker Arnott.
You're on mute, Mr. Speaker. We want to hear your voice. You're still on mute, Mr. Speaker.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we as a legislature continue to sit in person, as I've said before, but the standing committees, in many cases, we're sitting virtually. I think the primary benefit of virtual committees was that we were able to accommodate a large number of presentations from across the province where people could participate virtually who otherwise perhaps couldn't, especially with the difficulty with travel and various travel restrictions and public health advice that was upon us. But I also think that those best practices can be carried forward, again, assuming that the House wants them to, assuming that members on all sides of the House believe that it would be prudent and advantageous to do so.
Well, thank you for that. And I think we're hearing really clearly from most people that there should be some sort of criteria or area around why people could be away and participate virtually. I think of a testimony several days ago from one of the MPs who talked about being pregnant and not allowed to travel towards the end of her pregnancy, and what a difference it made for her to be able to continue to participate virtually, even though her health concerns made it impossible for her to be here. So I'm just wondering from both of you if you have any thoughts on how this tool could be used to create a more inclusive environment so that people who might be limited from participating can participate. I think that really our voice in Parliament is a reflection of the people that we serve, and making sure that that voice is heard, and we have to find the ways to do that. And when we hit a pandemic, of course, that was one of the most important parts, was how do we hold the government to account, and how do we make sure that our constituents' voices are heard? So I'm just wondering, within the work that you do, if you could share your thoughts on this. And I'll start again with Speaker Bennett.
Thank you very much. So right now, as I said earlier, we do it as a collective group. There is no ability right now within our standing orders for members to choose to be virtual because of health reasons, family reasons, but it's something that that has been considered, and we will be reviewing it again over the coming weeks and months to see how we can be, I guess, more inclusive and make sure that every member of the House of Assembly is able to represent the people of their districts. We did put a provision in our standing orders that we do allow children, infants, into the House Assembly should there be a parent that needs to care for a child. And since we did implement that, we did have 2 infants in our House of Assembly, which was definitely a welcome joy to the House. But as of right now, our standing orders do not permit for one-off type of request.
Well, the situation is similar in Ontario, but it's also been exciting for all of us as members to see some of the members who have become recently parents bringing their infant children into the chamber. We've had that on a number of occasions, and it's been welcomed by members on all sides of the House. But I think, again, the issue is still participation, the ability of members to represent their constituents, to participate fully, and this is a discussion that all of us in our respective parliaments need to have.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Berthold.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the 2 speakers for being here. Mr. Bennett, can you hear me? Can you hear the translation?
Very low, though.
Parfait. So, je vais parler lentement.
I'll speak slowly. Mr. Bennett and Mr. Arnott, I have an important question. We're getting ready to make recommendations on the future of our parliamentary system. Will we keep hybrid parliament, or will we have only in-person sessions? I'd like to hear your opinion as an experienced parliamentarian. Should we proceed through a consensus among all the parties sitting at the House of Commons or in your assemblies? Or should these changes be imposed by a majority, a government majority, by simple vote? I think that this is a question that has to be asked, and we have to elaborate further. Perhaps Mr. Arnott to begin.
Well, again, I'm not really in a position to provide direction to the House of Commons or the Senate on this question. I think the members need to.
So answer just for your assembly. Do you think that kind of change could have been made by consensus or by imposing by the majority of the government?
Well, I think every speaker would want to see discussion taking place on involving all members, ideally, or their representatives by their House leaders and whips. And ideally a consensus determined based on honest discussion and the public interest and the interests of Parliament as a whole, and with no government or opposition party trying to seek short-term partisan advantage in the discussions or the final decision that would be made.
Merci, Monsieur Bennett.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
And very similarly, I think Newfoundland Labrador legislature, we had a very in-depth discussion on this here, but as I alluded to in my opening notes, it was the recommendation of the Select Committee that it was preferred that all members would be present in when we were sitting in the House of Assembly. As for the committee meetings, that it worked quite well, but we got a smaller legislation, 40 members.
Monsieur Bennett, vous avez mentionné.
Mr. Bennett, you mentioned that the fact of participating in hybrid parliament could have an impact on the fluidity of debate. Could you explain or give further detail? How can hybrid parliament hinder the fluidity of debate?
I guess it is very challenging, I think, as a speaker to monitor the virtual hybrid setting. We did look at different various scenarios if we did move to that model. We did consult heavily with the House leaders and also the unaffiliated members. We felt that we would have to move to a much more structured proceedings where everything was scripted. We would know who would be speaking, which order they would be speaking, and also the full I guess, proceedings of the day. It wouldn't allow for, I guess, members to rise to speak without us having previous notice.
Monsieur Arnott, Speaker Arnott, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Speaker Arnott, could you tell us why the Ontario legislature was so reticent in adhering to a hybrid model and finally decided to continue? So what made it so that Ontario MLAs decided to sit in person?
Well, I think it was the decision of the House to continue to sit in person. There would be individual members, I think, that might have strongly favored continuing to sit in person, perhaps others that would have preferred to have greater consideration to a hybrid model. But in the final analysis, the House, in its final decision, was to continue. And I think it's fair to say that as the Speaker of the Legislature, as well as the staff of the Assembly, we were prepared to look at various alternatives if the House determined that that was necessary. But in the end, the House decided to carry on in person with fewer members, with public health advice that we brought into the building, and hopefully in a way that was ensuring that members and staff would be safe. Unfortunately, restricting access to the general public much of the time, but all of that is now evolving, and we're now that we're into the fall, we're allowing more people back in the building. And I see the chair is wanting to cut me off.
I was just so overwhelmed with everything being shared, and I know that Mrs. Romanato wants to just get to her 5 minutes of questioning. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I'd like to welcome our two witnesses. I'm going to be sharing my time with Mr. Gerritsen, so I'll be quick. I'd be remiss to not mention that this morning history was made in Quebec where two MNAs were sworn in by video conference to the new National Assembly because one of is expecting very, very, very shortly, and her husband, who's also an MNA, was sworn in. So I'd like to say that provincial legislatures are making accommodations to include for the one-offs. And in that regard, we have hybrid parliament provisions until the end of June of 2023 currently. And as you can see, every member of this committee is physically in the room. So the option to participate in a hybrid or virtually is there. But as you can see, most of us do choose to be here. And I understand that both provincial legislatures do not have that provision right now, both Newfoundland, Labrador, and Ontario. So in a case where you had an elected official who could not physically go to the legislature, would that not be a breach of their parliamentary privilege? And if so, what accommodations could you make for them to be able to, should they have a case of, for instance, illness, or if they had COVID and didn't want to infect their colleagues? Either speaker.
I could go first. The Legislative Assembly of Ontario does not currently empower the Speaker to give that authorization or authority to members. The Speaker doesn't have that authority.
Okay. Speaker Bennett?
And likewise, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the Speaker doesn't have the authority either. That would have to come from the House of Assembly.
I'll cede the rest of my time to Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. Mr. Arnott, my question would be for you. I understand that you've spent a long time in the Ontario legislature, dating back to 1990. You've seen a lot of people come and go since then, including somebody that shares the same last name as me, which you probably got to know over the years. And you've had an opportunity, obviously, to build camaraderie amongst individuals from across the way, as well as individuals within your own party. We had some testimony earlier to the two of you joining us to the effect that we run the risk of the ability to create and build that camaraderie if we were to all suddenly engage in hybrid ways of communicating like this, where we don't have the opportunities to mix and mingle, to share, to sit down for lunch together, to talk amongst ourselves offline, so to speak. I'm curious, given your extensive time serving in the provincial legislature, do you see that as a risk? And if you do, can you provide any ways to try to, mitigate that and to ensure that that doesn't happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for the question. And yes, I would agree that the participation of members in the legislature is enhanced by their opportunities to speak to each other face to face. And camaraderie is one word. Perhaps we could use collegiality. I think if individual people get to know each other across party lines, it can only add to the decorum of Parliament, and also the ability, perhaps, of the residents that are watching to see meaningful debate, as opposed to debate degenerating into insults. So there's a huge advantage, in my opinion. We've had to go through this last 2.5, 3 years almost. In our society, it's not just Parliament, it's not just the legislatures. Communication is a big challenge with virtual approaches, but I think we've done the best we could. But I would agree that when people get together face to face, that allows them to get to know each other better, and allows I think a more
and to that end,
discussion and dialogue.
And to that end, if I may follow up on that, would you agree then that the general use of hybrid parliament, if it was to function on a permanent basis, should be reserved for the exceptions, should be reserved for when people are sick and cannot come, should not be the default that people use, but should be reserved and utilized for the exceptions of when people need to use it for various different reasons, personal or professional?
Again, that's a question for the House of Commons to decide, in the Senate and the individual legislatures, recognizing that there are advantages to what you're suggesting.
Thank you.
Excellent. So that brings us to our time together. Madame Goudreau?
Oui, j'aimerais prendre...
Yes, I'd like to take 20 seconds to mention my discontent. It's not normal that during deliberations in French, where I thank you to the interpreters for your work, we were limited. People were speaking in the room, it was disturbing, and I was not able to receive the answers, but our witnesses were not able to clearly hear my questions in English. So I wanted to state this, and what I'm suggesting is that from now on, there would be a test, a real test, to make sure that interpretation is audible to the witnesses, because we will obviously have more witnesses in virtual. Thank you, Mrs. Gaudreau. This is something that I've already shared with the clerk, and I've asked the clerk to find out where the problems arose from. If someone is not if there is a process, but I believe that something went wrong today, and we're going to figure it out, find the answers, and share them with the members of the committee. Madam Chair, I would have a question for Mr. Bennett that he didn't hear. If you will remember, when I asked the question to each of the speakers as to why their members were so reticent in adopting a hybrid model, unfortunately, Mr. Bennett also had issues in hearing the interpretation. So could he please send the answer in written form? That would be greatly appreciated. I don't want to risk having interpretation problems again. Yes.
Make sure that Mr. Turnbull.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Chair. I was just trying to get on the speaker's list to raise a similar point that's related to this. Obviously, we had Mr. Williamson scheduled to be here today. His quality of sound was not good enough. Could he also submit written responses to questions that I had prepared for him? Because I think it's only fair if others can do that, then I'm sure Andy Williamson should be given the same opportunity.
Thank you for that. So on the point of just technical issues and translation and so forth, we are going to make sure, first of all, we find out what happened, because it's an issue for me. It's something I take very seriously, as do all members. We would love to hear from speakers who have joined us today to provide us those answers. And what I'll ask the clerk to do is perhaps to provide the transcript, the official transcript once it's out, to both of you to make sure that you can provide us any additional content, because we would like to have that. On the point that Mr. Turnbull has raised, Mr. Williamson, as we were suspended, had shared that he has submitted to us in writing. So it's in the brief. The clerk will confirm it. If there is follow-up questions, we have no problem sharing those. But as I said to him, yes, he is more than welcome to send more information. But I also just want to repeat now again that we are going to see if we can have him join again before the conclusion of this study.
So I understand he's submitted some remarks, but I had specific questions for him, and I'm asking if I can send those questions along to have him submit written answers to those questions. And if that is the case, that's great. If he were to appear, even better, but I also know that the committee's schedule is tight and he may not be able to be rescheduled.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Yes, you can send them to the clerk, and I'll offer it to all members that if you would like to send Mr. Williamson questions, that they can be submitted to the clerk, and the clerk will submit them to Mr. Williamson, and the clerk will get back to us within, I would say, a week to confirm if Mr. Williamson is coming. Otherwise, we'll put a deadline to providing us questions so he can respond in ample time. With that, I hope everyone keeps well and safe, and we'll see you on Thursday.